do you view this phenomenon? Again, you mentioned Fridays for Future as an example. Is this further justification that young people are not feeling represented in democracy and they feel the need to take to the streets and demonstrate and protest to be able to have their voice heard?
I'm really happy that Fridays for Future came a few years ago, because before you had the feeling that the young people are not interested in public life and in politics. The 90s and the early 10s, I had the feeling that youth engagement was lower than it was already decades before.
How can we perhaps gear our education system in a way that feels the needs of the job market and provides young people with the opportunity to find meaningful work related to what they study?
I think among the 27 member states of the EU, one can learn from each other. Scandinavian states have been quite good to bring young people into jobs. You should bombard them with your concerns. Then do the same with your home government. And as we discussed it, organize yourself in youth organizations, or when the citizens panels are coming as youth panels, apply for it. I saw some of them who have been in the panels and they have changed completely their attitude towards politics and towards the EU. They said, oh, I thought this is a hidden thing, I never can have access. And it's in some way it's easy. Brussels has open doors. It looks as a closed shop. It is not true. There are so many entry doors to participate, and I encourage you to do so. And I'm happy that the European movement is facilitating you this possibility. Thank you.
You took the words straight out of my mouth. This is exactly the purpose of this whole project, certainly the purpose of this event, to provide avenues for engagement with the EU institutions for young people across Europe. And like you said, the European movement, but other civil society organizations are also there to be the bridge, be the connector between citizens and the EU institution.
Hello, I am Emanuela. I am from Poland. As you can see, I am a volunteer at the organization that's not the part of this project as a whole, but my organization is helping young people develop educationally and socially. And I am now studying pedagogy. So the rights of the young people are very important to me. And because of that, I go to a lot of mobilities to actually learn more competences to use in my future work. And I really want young people to know that they can do what they want.
Thank you very much for that. Dziękuję. Dziękuję bardzo. Adam, you're next. Introduce yourself there, please, Adam.
Okay, so I'm Adam, and I'm also from the local association. We work with culture and with history of our little village. And I'm studying international relations right now. So I'm into every European thing.
Excellent.
I believe that to bridge any kind of gap, the recipe is always pretty much the same. So we have to have open communication, mutual understanding, and collaboration. And this also, of course, holds true for bridging the gap between the private sector companies and also the aspirations of young people when it comes to work life. Where I come from, we have seen when we ask from our SMEs that they actually recognize quite well after COVID-19 that if they don't offer remote working options when they are trying to acquire young talent, they are losing this competition to other companies who can offer this kind of remote working opportunities because employees actually these days, they want to have these opportunities available for them. So this is just one practical example how companies need to also understand the change of mindset in younger generations when it comes to work life.
Mira Maria, is the situation different now where we have so much employment in the economy, i.e., do the young people starting out on the work ladder, do they not have a lot more power now than they had, I don't know, just after the financial crisis when there was so much unemployment? They have so much power because employers are screaming out for staff.
That is true, but I think we also need to recognize that the problems that we have in different sectors in finding skilled staff vary quite a lot. So we have certain sectors where indeed new graduates are being pulled to work, but then also we do have quite some sectors where the situation is different.
But you're not satisfied with that because you want to do something that is similar to what you have studied and want to become and do in the future. As you already mentioned, in Greece, there's a high level of unemployment in the youth sector, but we don't feel so encouraged sometimes to work given the not fair conditions.
It's more the expectations are different and becoming more reasonable. People's expectations of employment have become higher, but it's not unreasonably high. It's people are just demanding fair wages, good contracts, job stability, and that's not something that's available. So even with those high employment rates, I think there's a question beyond that of, is it quality employment? Is it job security related to your skills and interests of trainings? Is it job opportunities where there's chances to grow and prosper?
So I think indeed, probably the standards have lowered, and young people are among those that suffer the most from this. Another thing that resonated with me was when Hara was talking about the Greek situation. So I'm not Greek, I'm Italian. And like you, I studied international relations a few years back. And I was faced with a national reality where it was quite clear that at some point I might have had to go elsewhere in order to maybe pursue that career I had in mind while studying.
Would it not be fair to say, Valeria, and sticking with you, that things are much better in 2024 than they were 25 years ago at the start of the new millennium for young people?
Much better, I don't know. I think, yeah, we do remember the big financial crisis and the big economic crisis and how difficult it was for young graduates back then. I think mobility and also digital means and the pandemic brought in also positive perspectives to the labor market that probably, will help people entering the labor market right now. From the perspective very much of, I think, DigiJustice and somebody who's been working on fundamental rights for a while, I think what I can say is that there is a much stronger awareness also among young people about the fact that there are certain sets of rights that the EU has brought certain rights to citizens. And I think maybe, yes, compared to years back, the awareness is stronger, which also empowers young people to, in a way, speak out about that. But whether overall the situation is much better, I'm not really able, I think, to comment on that.
To Tamara from the European Students' Union, what are the biggest obstacles to achieving equal opportunities for students across Europe, and how can the EU help reduce those barriers?
To be honest, it's hard for me to even know where to start when it comes to the barriers. I would maybe start with in terms of education.
The two biggest barriers.
The two biggest. I would firstly start with the funding disparities and resource allocation, because we can see from the distance, the student representatives, that there are substantial differences in how countries fund education specifically, of course leading to unequal access to quality resources like modern facilities, technologies, teaching materials, and so on. And this is particularly obvious for us between wealthier EU states and those with more limited budgets, let's say it this way. And of course, as a solution, maybe the solution would be that the EU can increase targeted funding through maybe programs like Erasmus+, and of course prioritizing investments in regions with lower educational attainment or limited resources. Besides the funding disparities in the higher education systems, I also mentioned the socioeconomic inequality and poverty that comes somehow together with discrimination and social inclusion and geographical disparities between urban and rural areas, because the socioeconomic status is a major determinant of educational success, even if we don't like that much. Children from lower income families often lack the support structures, tutoring opportunities, and even basic needs like nutrition, which directly impact their educational outcomes. And this still exists in Europe, even if it probably sounds very far from us. And here I would say that the EU can maybe further strengthen different programs like the Child Guarantee Initiative or other type of similar programs that can aim to ensure that children at risk of poverty have access to key services, especially including education, healthcare, and housing.
The financial supports and funds are really a big harm for youth. We often youth cannot afford for some courses or trainings to get the practical knowledge and
qualifications. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, qualifications. Yeah, that's the word that I was searching for.
I think there's so much there about inequalities in employment and in poverty and social exclusion. As others have mentioned, there are huge disparities across member states, and I think one of the other panelists mentioned already, there are quite high rates of in-work poverty as well. Again, it's about this kind of barriers to equal access, and especially from our perspective, there's for the LGBTI community, there are still quite high rates of in-work poverty and large discrimination in access to jobs. A recent survey from the Fundamental Rights Agency of the EU found that about 1 in 5 LGBTI people have faced discrimination when trying to find a job because of their identity, and that's quite a bit higher for people who are trans or non-binary. And I think it's startling that we still see those quite high barriers. And then especially for younger people as well, it's this kind of cumulative problem where there's barriers in accessing education, and then that leads to difficulties in accessing education, accessing employment after that. And it's this kind of circular problem that shuts people out and ends in this kind of cycle of poverty and exclusion, which is difficult to overcome. But the key is early intervention and kind of specific programs to target that.
Okay, thank you, Aisling. Can I go back to Valeria in DG Just? Can you share examples of successful EU-funded projects that have significantly improved social rights and equal opportunities for young people? And what lessons can be learned from those projects?
So I decided to talk about one initiative that I think exemplifies a little bit others as well, in which DG Justice has been investing in the past 3 years, which is the establishment of what it's called EU Child Participation Platform. The idea of this platform is to bring together a lot of existing organizations that work with children and young people around the EU, and to really build a structural way for them and the EU institutions to discuss topics that matter to children and young people. So how basically do we bring the voice of children and young people much closer to decision makers, and how do we give some influence? How do we promote a meaningful participation of this target group? And I think this is really the key to a lot of solutions afterwards, or to a lot of projects, initiatives, measures that can actually bring about some results for children and young people. If we do not start by sitting down with the target group and asking ourselves, so what is important for you? Where should we put the priority of our funding? What should we reflect in this piece of legislation that talks about children and young people? What should we include in the next Commission strategy on non-discrimination of LGBTIQ, for example, communities? If we actually leave out all the people below 18 that qualify as children as well as young people from the conversation, how can we actually think that we're gonna design policies and measures that benefit them in the last place? So I think we have several projects that we fund under the SERVE program of DigiJustice that actually promote engagement in democratic life of youth.
So you mentioned getting the voice of under 18-year-olds. The problem with them for many politicians is they don't have a vote. And even those who are over 18 don't vote with the same frequency and reliability and even tendency that much older people do.
So
isn't that a problem?
I think young people who could vote but decide not to vote, it's because they don't engage necessarily in the way that we traditionally think of democratic engagement. Voting or subscribing to political parties, this is not necessarily the framework of democratic engagement that was set. I mean, it's a very adult-centric and old, let's say, or more traditional way of setting the frame for democratic engagement. So I think even there, again, it's a matter of redesigning the framework together and with young people. And for those who can't vote because they're below 18, or, I mean, as you know, some member states are lowering the voting age to 16, actually, because there is, I mean, a trend in that. But I think regardless of whether it's a problem or not, it's actually a right. Children have a right to be heard. It's enshrined in international law. And governments have to be held accountable for that. If it's not through voting, it has to be through other participation means.
Mm-hmm. Adam, in Poland, did you vote last time?
Yes, yes, I did.
Okay. Emanuela, did you vote?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, I want to be honest here. Raise your hand if you did not vote in the European elections. Raise your hand if you did not vote. Okay. Some of you have studied international relations. You've all done degrees of some description. You're very bright. You speak at least 2 or 3 languages. That this group is not representative of ordinary young people in Europe. Aisling, am I wrong?
No, I'd agree there. I mean, obviously, we're all on this panel for a reason, because this is where our interest lies in international relations. I think maybe alongside the voting is that also I think young people are more and more engaged in activism and in other forms of political participation, so getting involved in local politics or through protests and community organizing. I think we see that a lot more as well. So it's differing forms of political participation alongside voting, but regardless, I think there are quite high rates among young people today of political participation.
Okay, Mira Maria, can I bring you in on this? That young people's voice need to be heard. Everyone agrees with that, but it's difficult if they don't use their opportunity to vote and vote collectively and in large numbers.
Why are we not convincing? What's the problem with us, that young people? Because the question is not why people, no one asks why people don't go to vote. That's a question that should be asked, because they don't go to vote for a reason. And I don't think necessarily that they engage in other things. Yes, they also engage in other types of activities that are related to the democratic life, but usually they don't go to vote because they see no reason in voting. So maybe that's the problem that we should address. That's the root cause that we should treat. Not that young people don't go to vote, but why they don't go to vote. So I would add that to what Ila just texted in the chat.
Okay, I'll push back and say that young people are simply too busy socializing and discovering themselves and all that kind of thing, and they're just not interested in politics. How would you respond to those people enraged at the idea of states funding programs that help youth find employment and affordable housing, who also claim that this would lead to a welfare state? In Romania, initiatives that address these issues are often perceived as woke policies that encourage laziness. Aisling, do you want to get in on that one?
Yeah, sure. I guess one point I'd also like to make just on the previous conversation quickly is just I think it's also a problem that politics isn't responding to what young people care about. I mean, just before the European elections earlier this year, there was a survey that showed that access to affordable housing and climate policies were the things that most voters cared about. And for younger voters, that was even a starker preference. But then what has been the focus of the EU since those elections? It has been all about defence and all about foreign policy in a very right-wing and regressive way. Also, a lot of these politicians are furthering this divide that kind of polarizes society on issues of migration, on issues of LGBTI people. And I just don't think, I think that's maybe another reason why young people feel a bit disconnected, is that there's not a response from politicians to the things that young people actually care about and have publicly said that they care about and are advocating for and are on the streets during climate protests all the time. But then, yeah, I think it's, I don't know, again, as Tamara said, it's a problem for politicians and organizations to respond to what young people care about rather than the other way around and putting all the onus on young people who have told us what they care about.
And the question about those people who say that you're turning people into dependents on a quote welfare state, and that you'd often perceived as woke policies.
It's not a new thing. It's the idea of having state pensions. State healthcare is very common across all European countries. But again, it's something that it is in the interest of regressive anti-democratic actors to position that as something new, as something woke, in quotes, something that isn't of benefit to everybody. But I think we can spin that narrative on its head and say, well, don't you also benefit from these programs? If there is something helping young people gain access to affordable housing, I find it really difficult to see how someone could disagree with that. It's not laziness, it's the simple idea that all of us at some point will need some help from our community, be that in terms of when we're sick, we need someone else to care for us, or when we are old and are not physically able to work anymore, we need support from a state pension or healthcare services. I think it's a very insidious and kind of false narrative to spin that is somehow pandering to laziness in society or kind of not something that has been around for a long time.
Yeah, but you do get that Europe is moving to the right, and people have democratically elected far-right politicians, and that there is a pushback on so-called woke policies.
Again, I wouldn't see that those votes for far-right parties are a pushback to woke policies. I think it's a response to this polarization that I mentioned earlier, that's positioning all societal ills and saying that is the fault of migrants, of LGBTI organizations, of women's rights movements, and that is, first of all, just not true. And also, that's a strategy from those political actors to sow division and to distract everyone from the issues that we all actually care about, to stop us talking about affordable housing, about fair wages, about high youth employment, about good jobs. It's to distract from that and say, no, the actual conversation should be about these false claims about migration or wokeness, and so it's to stop us mobilizing and to discourage people from engaging in democratic systems, which is only in the interests of those who aim to be dictators or to tear down democratic institutions.
Hara, in Greece, can I bring you in on this? Are young people woke or simply ahead of the game or ahead of their time in demanding changes?
Well, I would say that in Greece, the youth people are not so engaged or encouraged. Like they don't even go to vote in our national elections. How we're supposed to think they're gonna like to vote in the EU elections that happened this June. So I think that they're not so engaged, informed about politics and how the EU works. Like there are people here, like in my university or even my friends, that don't know how EU works, how politics work, especially now, given all the conditions that the situation is changing so fast.
So for sure, I mean, it's much larger than suiting the needs and the wishes of young people, I think.
Obviously, governments will say they have to be sure that of the integrity of the election. And as a result, they are very nervous about allowing e-voting. But for countries like Ireland, where I come from, you cannot vote from outside the country. You have to fly home if you want to exercise your vote. And quite a few people did fly home to vote in very important referendums on equal marriage and on abortion rights in Ireland. But it is a disgrace that I've spent most of my adult life outside Ireland and I could never vote unless I was physically on the island. Any plans to introduce e-voting Europe-wide? Valeria?
Not that I know of. Also, given different competencies and national strong competencies in this.
It's unlikely, isn't it?
What I can say is that for sure there is a huge focus on democracy in general in the political guidelines of the President of the European Commission.
We focus too much on traditional career paths, so being an employee, and we miss out, in my opinion, the benefits of starting your own business, because we have a big interest from the young generation to become an entrepreneur or self-employed. But in fact, this interest doesn't really still actualize in higher numbers of young entrepreneurs. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. And then if I may still make a small advertisement for the committee. So in the European Economic and Social Committee, we have developed a youth test. And this is a tool that is designed to take the younger generations into our work. So we make opinions about the EU policy proposals, and we are actually engaging through this tool youth representatives in the working groups that we have. So they are also equally allowed to say their position, and we take these youth voices into account in our work. It's a very novel tool. None of the other EU institutions have it, so we have only started to deploy it last year, and we are really looking forward to have the young voices into our processes in the institution.
Also on the side of decision makers, how open they are and willing they are to share this kind of tasks and responsibilities with the youth councils. The cases vary. Kyriaki later on will talk to us about her experience, but based on the research we've seen, many youth councils are not as actively involved as they could be, and maybe they should be, for the benefit of everyone. Why are they important? We've tried to group, let's say, the main benefits in 3 categories. And the first one being effective functioning of local governance, because of course youth participation and representation are crucial for the effective governance, for the effective functioning of local administrative systems, as they ensure that the views and needs of the youth are considered the core of the functioning of the Youth Council. Also, there is inclusion and political development as a very important benefit. Active youth participation in local governance contributes to the creation of strong social capital based on reciprocity, trust, and collective action. The concept of trust is quite interesting, because it also not only builds the trust between the youth council members itself, but the mere fact of having a youth council can increase the transparency in different processes and can rebuild or re-establish trust between the youth and the government in case this has been disrupted, which is the case Thank you. And moving on to the last question, which for me is the most interesting. Has your youth council, you'd say, has it managed to influence any local policies in the end? Because at the end of the day, supposedly this is a main goal and target of a youth council on any level it might work.
The fact is that the local authority in the beginning, even if the council became a part of the local authority, they were a little bit suspicious about what young people can do. But finally, we managed to be part of the council of the city of Larissa, and to advise the council on many issues. I can share some examples such as a brochure for stray animals in our city, for unemployed people. Also, they helped the council to increase the participation of young people by sharing facts, by organizing events, and also members of the youth council can be part in the meetings of the youth of the council of Larissa. So throughout the years, we have gained their trust. We share our opinions. And the reason why I shared the photos here is that all these buildings you see here are emblematic buildings and sites of the city. So I would like to create a link between the youth generation and the past in our city. Because by collaborating, we can achieve more and more.
I see. And I also see that being a young person, most of the times it takes some extra effort to prove yourself and to prove the fact that you deserve to be there and to be taken seriously. And as you've mentioned, being persistent on that and having the courage, but also the patience to do that is very important.